It is January 20th, 2025, and the United States officially has a new president in office, although he's not exactly new to the job. Donald Trump is now the 45th and also the 47th president of the US. And in today's video, I want to go through some of the takeaways that I had from the inauguration ceremony that was held earlier. And I also want to talk about one very important message that was sent to Trump today. He got congratulations from a lot of world leaders, but that notably includes Russian President Putin. And Putin didn't just say congratulations on becoming the president again. No, he also sent a very important message to Trump about where Russia stands on the possibility of talks over Ukraine and also on what they are looking for out of those talks. So we are going to be getting into all of that here today. But before we do, just a quick note here, because I know that the overwhelming majority of you have started following me within the last 4 years. So you likely were not here for my coverage of the first term of the Trump administration. And I just want to note here that when it comes to Trump, just as I was with Joe Biden, with Trump previously, with Obama before him, I will continue to be critical of his foreign policy where I feel that it is warranted. I will hold him to the exact same standards that I have held every other president and that I hope to hold every president that there is to come. Because standards are standards at the end of the day. It does not matter if the president is Democrat, Republican, whatever it may be. If Trump is here, if he's actively supporting genocide in Gaza while he's in office, I'm going to be talking about it. If he's promising to end the war in Ukraine and doing the exact opposite, I'm going to be talking about it. And there are some of you who may not like that. You may think that I'm being too critical of Trump, but I think it's important to hold the same standards for every leader that is in office. I'm speaking as an American citizen, right? So I'm talking about my government. I am a taxpayer, right? I'm having to support this government financially. So I am here to criticize them along the way, and I am going to continue to do that as I see fit. Also, for the record, if I'm critical of Trump, it does not mean that I would have preferred Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or anyone else, right? It's not about that, because that's the argument that people always seem to bring up, right? They're like, oh, well, at least it's not Harris. Well, okay, if that's your argument, then that's fine, but you still should reserve the right to hold the president accountable, no matter who it is, no matter how the other option would have worked out. So let's just put that out there now as we get into this new Trump era. And let's talk about the inauguration ceremony that was held earlier today. It was notably inside the US Capitol building because it was the coldest inauguration day that Washington, D.C. has seen in 40 years. It's kind of insane to think about. And it was also interesting because watching this, the first thing that caught my eye, it was not the fact that you had, Obama, Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, Biden, all of these people that do not like Trump that were sitting there watching him talk and basically talking about how he was going to undo everything he could think of to undo from the Biden administration and change it back to the way that it was when he was in office the first time. Although I should also note that that's exactly what Biden did. I mean, how many executive orders did Biden sign, basically undoing every Trump policy he could come up with on his first day in office? So it's not as if Trump is setting some new precedent here. But no, the thing that stood out to me when I started following the inauguration ceremony today was that apparently we had Silicon Valley row front and center. I mean, I'm talking about ex-CEO Elon Musk, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg, Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos, and his girlfriend and her extremely tacky attire. I still cannot believe that she wore what basically looked like lingerie under a suit coat to an inauguration. Like, what are you thinking? I know that as critical as I am of the government and really everything involving the government, I'm still over here going, can we have some decorum, please? Like, can we at least show up and dress appropriately to our inauguration ceremony? I feel like the US is going to look like the laughing stock of the world for some of the stuff that goes on here. I'm sure we already are. But also notable that you also had Apple CEO Tim Cook. He just wasn't there in kind of the main frame of all of the big tech CEOs who were off to the side of Trump and visible in a lot of the photos of him being sworn into office. And you even had TikTok CEO Shou Chew, who notably was pictured sitting right next to Trump's pick for the next director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, I cannot even make this up. Over the last week, it has been just a roller coaster involving the app TikTok. Of course, last year, Congress signed a law banning TikTok, basically trying to force the Chinese company ByteDance to sell TikTok off. And then you had Biden sign that bill into law. And then you had the Supreme Court last week uphold it on national security concerns. Yet here's the CEO of TikTok sitting next to our next director of national intelligence. And that may be giving us some insight into why Trump is openly saying he's going to save TikTok, right? That he has plans. He's going to sign a 90-day extension that will allow some time for his administration to quote unquote figure it out. You also notably have an update from China on this one, as the Chinese Foreign Ministry said for the first time on Monday that it was up to ByteDance whether it wanted to enter into a deal that would be approved by the Trump administration to then avoid the ban of TikTok. So we obviously don't know exactly what that situation is going to look like just yet, but to me, this tells me that they have a deal, right? That something has been agreed upon between Trump and TikTok. I don't know what that's going to look like. I'm curious to see what it's going to look like and how they are going to either try to sidestep the law that was passed or kind of find a way to work with it or do away with it altogether. But that being said, I'm also very curious to see how this cozy relationship with all of these big tech CEOs is going to work during the Trump administration. I mean, as we saw with Mark Zuckerberg, he's going into his reformed era. He's acting like he's been born again and he's discovered free speech for the first time. He came out and said, look, the Biden administration told Facebook and Instagram what to censor, what content, what users to silence, and they did it. They did whatever the White House told them to do. And Mark Zuckerberg claimed that he regretted that. So I'm very curious to see. Now, I do think that Mark Zuckerberg is just sucking up to Trump here because he's seeing that that's the popular thing to do, right? He's seeing Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and all of these other individuals who are acting like they're all buddy with Trump all of a sudden. Zuckerberg saying, okay, this is the trend. I'm going to do exactly that. But I'm very curious to see if there's some sort of protest movement against the Trump administration, especially if we see an increase in protest, calling out Israel for committing genocide in Gaza. If, this current ceasefire deal, no matter how that goes, if there is a war that breaks out and you see a protest movement over that, I'm very curious to see how the approach to quote unquote free speech plays out when it's an issue that the Trump administration wants silenced. Because I know that they're talking about free speech and everything now, and everything's all, nice and warm and cozy now, and that's all fine and good, but it's not going to be that way, I don't think, for the entire 4 years that Trump is in office. I think there's going to come a point, no matter what it may be, whether it's war related, whether it's related to something else, when you see big tech in a situation where they're getting pressure, or maybe they are kind of feeling pressure in a way to stand up for the Trump administration, even if it's not direct pressure. I'm curious to see how they handle that and how they handle the content on their platforms and who they silence as a result, or if they silence anyone, right? I don't exactly believe, I'm not the most optimistic that Mark Zuckerberg of all people is moving into some kind of free speech era, but you know what? I'll give him the benefit of the doubt in terms of waiting and seeing, even though I don't have much hope or optimism whatsoever that he is suddenly going to decide that he's in favor of the users and their free speech after all of the, not just users he's silenced, but independent journalists and alternative media outlets he has silenced. I've witnessed it firsthand. I've seen his pages with, millions of followers were silenced completely, deleted off of Facebook as if they never existed. And so for Mark Zuckerberg to be in this place where he's acting like he's now born again, I'm going, I don't buy it, but you know what? We will see. We will have a few years to see what that actually looks like. Now, in addition to the guests that attended the inauguration ceremony today, you also had Trump's speech. And I was really curious to see what he would say that was foreign policy related. And the answer was not a lot. He did not mention Israel, which I thought was really interesting. He didn't mention Israel by name. His only Israel related reference that I saw was him saying the hostages in the Middle East are coming home to their families. And he's only saying that because he's taking credit for the ceasefire and hostage release deal that Hamas and Israel agreed to this week. And he's taking credit for the fact that he managed to get that deal over the finish line before he was even in office. Notably, Israeli citizen and billionaire mega donor Miriam Adelson, who famously gave Trump's campaign $100 million. Not only was she in attendance at the inauguration ceremony, but she was sitting front and center. She had a better seat than the majority of the members of Trump's own cabinet. So the Israel-related influence was there. It was in the room. It just notably was not mentioned in Trump's speech. Trump also did not mention Ukraine once, or Russia, or Iran. And the only time he mentioned China was just in reference to his plans for the Panama Canal. In fact, Trump specifically said that his proudest legacy will be that of a peacemaker and a unifier.
We will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars that we end, and perhaps most importantly, the wars we never get into.
And speaking of ending wars, we all know that one thing that Trump campaigned very heavily on in the 2024 election was this promise that he was going to end the war in Ukraine. He claimed he would do it as president-elect. Clearly, that didn't really work out. We're now in the first 24 hours of his second term in office when he claimed he would end it. I do not expect it to be wrapped up in 24 hours. I don't expect it to end even just after the first round of talks. I think it's going to be a lot more complicated than Trump seems to think it's going to be. But I will give credit where credit is due, and I will say that one major, very positive difference between Trump and Biden is that Trump has emphasized the importance of having dialogue with Russia. And of course, we know Biden was the exact opposite of that. He cut off any sort of dialogue with Russia whatsoever, and instead just focused on sending however many hundreds of billions of dollars in lethal aid he could get to Kiev, while at the same time putting as many sanctions on Russia as he possibly could, trying to isolate and suffocate their economy. Now, we have yet to hear from Trump himself on what he actually plans to do regarding the war in Ukraine and tensions with Russia, which are clearly at an all-time high. But we did hear from Russian President Putin on Monday when he gave an address during a meeting of Russia's Security Council, and he actually sent Trump his congratulations on returning to the White House, and he also said he appreciates the fact that Trump has made it clear that he is open to dialogue.
И мы видим заявление вновь избранного президента США и членов его команды о желании восстановить прямые контакты с Россией, прерванные не по нашей вине уходящей администрации. Слышим также его заявление о необходимости сделать все, чтобы не допустить Третьей мировой войны. Безусловно, мы приветствуем такой настрой и поздравляем избранного президента Соединенных Штатов Америки со вступлением в должность.
Putin also noted that while Russia is open to talks on the war in Ukraine, they should be very clear about what the goals are here and about the fact that they are only going to be pushing for a lasting resolution. So in other words, they're not looking for a third version of the Minsk Accords where they make an agreement now in the short term and then the West turns around and uses the break in fighting to try to rebuild Kiev's military for a future war with Russia.
Мы также открыты для диалога с новой администрацией США по украинскому конфликту. Самое важное здесь – устранить первопричины кризиса, о которых мы много раз говорили. Это самое главное. Что же касается самого урегулирования ситуации, то вновь хочу подчеркнуть, его целью должно быть не краткое перемирие, а не какая-то передышка для перегруппировки сил и перевооружения с целью последующего продолжения конфликта, а долгосрочный мир на основе уважения законных интересов всех людей, всех народов, которые проживают в этом регионе.
And I think it's notable here that Putin is coming out and that he's saying this as clearly as he is, because every report that we've seen in the Western media where it's citing anonymous sources and they claim to be Trump insiders, they're all talking about a proposal of a frozen conflict, right? They're saying, hey, we'll have Trump come in here and just get Russia and Ukraine to freeze the conflict for a guarantee of 20 years. Kiev will promise that it won't join NATO, while at the same time, the West will have the freedom to rearm and rebuild Kiev's military. And Russia's coming out. Putin is literally saying as clearly as he can that that kind of a proposal is a non-starter for Russia. So Trump should already know that going into it, and then he needs to act accordingly. Now, another thing that Putin mentioned that I also thought was important to note here was the fact that he said that, yeah, we're open to talks, but just because there is the promise of talks does not mean that Russia is going to stop fighting. Because as a reminder here, Russian forces are advancing in the Donbass. And these advances are not only major, but they're also extremely significant. So it's not like Russia is going to slow down at a time when they have a lot of momentum.
Но мы, конечно, будем бороться за интересы России, за интересы российского народа. В этом, собственно, и заключается цель и смысл проведения специальной военной операции.
So the question then becomes, how is Trump going to deal with Ukraine and how is he going to deal with Russia? Because from watching his speech during his inauguration ceremony today, it seems like he has a lot on his plate, a lot of things that he's planning on dealing with, right? A number of executive orders that he's planning to pass. He has a really big focus on the southern border, on dealing with immigration, on dealing with getting out illegal migrants, although I don't know how much his administration is actually going to do with that. I think a lot of it's just for show at the end of the day, and they will have a big emphasis on quote unquote border security. I do think it's likely that he's really going to focus on that because that is something that the American people have really expressed their frustrations with, given the Biden administration's immigration policy. So I don't expect Trump to get to Russia, Ukraine right away. I do think it is a pressing issue. I do think he's going to have to, quote unquote, deal with it at some point. What is that going to look like? Well, he could push for talks. I mean, we know that Zelensky has signed a decree making it illegal for himself to have any negotiations with the Russian government while Putin is still in office. We could see Trump in a position where he's calling on Zelensky to reverse that decree and saying there will be talks or else. But I'm very curious to see how it plays out. If there is a Trump administration that pushes for a frozen conflict, even though Russia has been as clear as they can be that that is not something that they are willing to consider. And if there is a Trump administration that does what Trump's new national security advisor is pushing for them to do, which is to put more pressure on Russia to try to drag them to the negotiating table. Putin's already saying, hey, I'm here. I'm ready to talk. I think that that is an offer that Trump should take the Russian president up on. But what is he going to do? Well, so much of it still remains to be seen. And I know that I will continue to not only cover this conflict, but a number of others as we get into the second term of the Trump administration and as we continue to focus on the importance of accountability for the U.S. government, no matter who is in office or what political party they represent. And that's something everyone should be talking about. If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also find Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.